Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our first session of the Summer Skill Up. My name is Christian Garcia, and I'm the Associate Dean and Executive Director of the Topple Career Center. I'm really excited that you all have joined us this evening for our first session. We have a great panel today to go over a lot of questions that folks have in terms of what's going on with the current situation with COVID-19 and the job search. And I'm really excited to learn and to share knowledge with you all. They're going to share some great knowledge with you all. So as you may know, the Summer Skill Up is a series that was created to provide alumni inspiration, motivation, and tangible advice from alumni experts in a variety of fields of work. We're actually going to have, in addition to the one tonight, 3 additional sessions that include gaining experience, skills, and connections on July 8th, career positivity during challenging times on July 22nd, and lessons learned from the Great Recession on August 5th. And we hope that you'll join us for some, if not all of those sessions. So before we get started, what we would like to do is go over some Zoom logistics. Throughout the presentation, we definitely want folks to be able to participate by asking any questions that you may have. So there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. You can click on that and actually enter your question anytime throughout the presentation. If you would like to speak and the host gives you access to speak, you can unmute yourself where you see audio settings, as you can see on the screen. So with that, we're going to go on to a poll to kick things off, because we want to know where our alumni are falling today. So the poll question is going to be as follows, pretty simple. How long has it been since you graduated from the University of Miami? Within the last 5 years, between 5 and 10 years, or 10 plus years? So we'll give you about a minute to fill that out. So if you can just click on the one that's appropriate to you. Okay, so it looks like we've come to the end of the poll. It looks like we have the majority of the folks who have been out for 10 plus years, followed by within the last 5 years, and everyone else kind of falling within the middle. So today really is to, we're gonna address as many questions and address as many topics as possible to really touch on something for everyone. So again, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to go into the Q&A box and write in that question. So I'm gonna ask my panelists to join me today, and I'm gonna do a quick introduction of each, and we're gonna jump right in. All right, so I would like to introduce, it's my pleasure to introduce Bill Fiss, who's the Managing Director and Global Head of Talent and Diversity for Citi. He is a double Kane alumnus, BBA 75 and MBA 77. Sorry, I just, aged you there a little bit, Bill. And Bill is an amazing friend of the university, as in addition to being an alum. I'd also like to introduce Christine Cruz-Vergara, who's the Vice President for Higher Education and Student Success at Handshake. Christina also used to be one of us, and when I say one of us, I mean a Career Center person. Before her current role, she was the head of career education at Wellesley College, right outside of Boston. So why these 2 individuals? For several reasons. As I mentioned, Bill's a double alum, and he's been a great friend to the institution, and his organization has recruited hundreds of Canes to go work for him. And he just really understands and believes in networking and making sure that he helps students, they succeed as they leave the university. And then Christine, she's a personal friend of mine, I'll be honest, but also Christine is just amazing. She has that dual knowledge of what it's like to work on a college campus and help students as they navigate career education and job searching, and now working in ed tech and helping, in terms of technology, helping students find those opportunities via technology. So with that, I want to ask the first question, and I'm going to ask Christine first, actually.
Sure.
Why don't we start with what's going to seem like a basic question, but I think it's, you'll get it. What is a job search?
This is a great question. I think people say the term job search, and they often don't actually think about all the components that go into what does it mean to actually job search. So for those of you out there, I was a psychology major undergrad. You may remember a term called chunking, which is putting the information into sizable chunks so that you can actually remember everything that you need to do. So when you think about a job search, you can essentially categorize them into 4 major categories. The first part is your documents and your profile. You need to make sure that the documents that are representing who you are, that's typically your resume or your cover letter, or certainly this day and age, your online profile, is up to date, it's accurate, it reflects who you are, and it really tells a narrative of what you want others to understand about you. So that's the first thing. The second thing is your research. You need to do both macro and micro research before you engage in a job search. It's part of that process. You need to not only understand the role that you are applying for, you need to understand the company and how the company sits within the industry in which you want to enter, essentially. You need to be able to talk shop about what the emerging trends are in the field or in the role or function that you wish to pursue. So anytime you are looking at something, you need to not only do your research on the company and the role, you also need to do your research on the industry and follow thought leaders that are in that space so you have a better sense of what's actually happening, what are the biggest issues, what's keeping the CEO and the exec team up at night. The third is network. You need to build your network and your social capital. You need to be able to build those relationships. Networking is not about collecting business cards. It's not about schmoozing. It's about building real relationships. It's getting to know people, understanding how they got to where they are, learning from them and their experience, getting advice, and vice versa. There's a lot of knowledge and expertise that you likely know as well, even as a student, even as a young alum, if you are not many years out, that you could also offer back. And there may also be relationships you have that could also help in that connection piece. And then the final step of your job search is actually to do the job search and apply. There's one action that every single person has to do in order to even achieve an opportunity, and that is to apply. You actually have to then find the opportunity, click on it, and submit your application. Now, what I will say is most people, if you think about the 4 categories I just shared with you, most people do step 1 and they immediately skip over to step 4. So they take care of their resume, their cover letter, maybe their profile, and then they immediately go online and they start applying. And then I guarantee you the majority of them will come back and they will say, I didn't hear back from anybody. I don't know why I'm not getting an interview. What's going on? And the reason is you're not doing enough of 2 and 3. You haven't done enough research and you haven't done enough networking. And so if 4 is not working for you, you know you need to back it up and you need to do more of the stuff in the middle. So that's what a job search is.
Thank you, Christine. You work for a company that's what you do, right? You help students find opportunities. And we're going to talk a little bit about democratizing opportunities for students, which is what your company is all about. But is there a magic number? You all are about metrics and, you have a lot of data, but is there a magic number for how many jobs a candidate should apply for that will make them, that qualifies as a job search or a successful job search?
Well, I can tell you what's not a magic number. 2 is not a magic number. 5 is not a magic number. 10 is not a magic number. So while there isn't exactly a special number that you need to hit in order to be able to have a successful job search, what I can tell you is that submitting just 2, 5, even 10 applications per week, per month, definitely not enough. This is a competitive market right now. Obviously, things have been impacted by COVID-19, and you need to make sure that you're putting yourself out there. You need to make sure that you're applying for more opportunities than you typically would. And anything that is interesting to you could be a really good option for you to be able to practice some of your interviewing skills. And so definitely encourage you to apply to more so that you have more options for yourself and to also be more flexible in what you are considering rather than only looking at the narrow path that you may have been thinking about previously.
Thank you, Christine. And it was kind of a loaded question, as I'm sure you know. My colleagues and I at the Topple Career Center, and I think at any career center, we always get that question. Students will say, or young alums will say, well, I haven't been able to find anything. And we follow up with, well, how many jobs have you applied for? 2. And so, so it's great to hear that, there is no magic number per se, but certainly it has to be, in the double digits. It has to be consistent. Would you like to add anything to that, Bill? And in addition to that, Christine mentioned COVID-19. For your particular organization, what have you done, or how has your organization pivoted in this time of COVID-19 as someone who hires a lot of college talent?
Yeah, no, thank you, Christian. First of all, I want to find out how I become a personal friend of yours, right? I thought we were at that stage, but
Sorry, you two guys.
Christine has me beat there, but I'm teasing. No, your themes, Christine, I'm sure we'll talk about them as we get through the discussion, are in my perspective spot on, right? And whether you're a young alum or somebody very experienced in the job search process, I couldn't agree with you more. I can't tell you how many times, individuals that we talk to, we want to mentor, have a gap, right, in terms of how they're approaching the complexity and the comprehensiveness of a job search. So couldn't agree with you more, and I'm sure we'll come back to some of those themes. Kristen, to your question about COVID-19, where do I start, right? Wow, right? And I've been at Citi for, you already aged me out there, so I'll admit, 40 years, right, in one place, and that's a whole nother story with a lot of different career paths, but I've never seen anything like this. Now, despite all the challenges that it has brought to firms like Citi and firms across the US and the world, it's also creating opportunities. And it's creating opportunities around how candidates and employees at the firm, in our case, we have 200,000 employees around the world, are watching and reacting to how the firm is responding to COVID-19. Are they sensitive? Are they doing the right things from a communication point of view? Quite frankly, and we can get to this, I'm sure we can even add, and appropriately so, the very unfortunate incidents of the last couple of months around racial inequality and everything that represents. And the point I'm getting to is this is a profound change in corporate life. And I can tell you with full sincerity, and you know me well enough, right, that I'm proud of the way we, and watching what other corporations are doing, to try to respond with transparency, with respect, with understanding to individuals, whether they're at the firm or they're trying to join the firm, in terms of doing the right things. And, my headline here, and I can get into detail as we go forward, but, we've talked about, I'll give you a quick example. I'm from New York, and even though Miami is my favorite city, the fact that I've been now remote for 3.5 months, like everybody else, because I live, a good hour and 45 minutes from downtown New York City, where I would have to commute. And they've said to me, and many others, right, it's all good. You work from home, it's remote. And we were on that relatively early, like many other firms, in early March, right? And now, as we begin in New York City to say, hey, 5%, July 1st, will be the first 5% of our employees who are invited to come back to workplace, the office. And if you don't want to, you just say, I'll decline that invitation. Almost like you're being invited, it's not a party, but you can decline. And so the point I'm making is, and it's not just Citi, but I'm partial there because I live there. I think corporations have really gone out of their way, small, medium, or large, to be very conscious and very respectful of this unbelievably difficult situation, and planning and communicating. Last thing I would say, high level, we've said it's all about the data, not the dates. And that's a phrase you may have heard, meaning we're not doing anything if we don't follow a very conservative approach with our employees and people prospectively wanting to join the firm. Dates don't matter, data does. And data has become quite impactful in terms of what we're trying to do. So I'd like to come back to later some of the cultural changes that this has offered. So it's very interesting that this is offering, beyond remote work, a pause and a reflect to say, is this the right time to consider other changes in who we are and what we're all about and our policies and procedures, driven by these extremely unusual circumstances, and not only COVID, but the racial inequality issues that we've all had to deal with. So more to come on that, but I'm proud of corporate America, quite frankly, and Citi in particular, in my case, in how we're responding.
Thank you, Bill. And I'm glad you brought that up, because, I think it's hard to it's hard to not have the conversation with everything that's going on in our not just our country but in the world related to racial injustice, anti-racism, and all that. So let's actually stick with that for a little bit. In terms of when you think of, because we have a good spread of alumni who've responded to the survey. So thinking about all the folks who may be represented here, as a first generation college student, or a Black alumnus, or other person of color, LGBTQ, who maybe doesn't have the social capital to break through a particular industry, or doesn't have the social capital or the mentors at their disposal to pivot because maybe they have lost their job due to a layoff. What are some advice that you could provide to those individuals? And this is a question for both of you. So you, Bill, from recruiting perspective, in your role, and then Christine from from the perspective of using technology and tools for connecting with other people who can help you with this, help you break through.
Yeah. So maybe I'll start, Christine, then I'll throw it back over to you. Again, and I've got a 40-year time frame at places like at Citi, right? This is the most committed we have ever been around diversity and inclusion. Part of my job is around strategic talent management, and I have a wonderful head of diversity inclusion for the piece of the organization that I support. I've never seen, and this is pre the incidents of the last few months, the racial inequality reaching a peak, and hopefully we're not just checking the box here. I have never seen from the board on down, and we are far from perfect, right? We've gone public to say, we're going to achieve representation aspirations of women and underrepresented, with a particular focus, and we've gone public on this, to the Black community. And that said, I'll give you an example, and you know this, right? When we bring in an intern class, and it's all about the youth, so I'm proud to say there's more Miami students coming in this summer, starting on July 6th, virtually, than ever before, or full-time. 50% of that incoming class now needs to be gender diverse, and up to 30% of that incoming class needs to be underrepresented minorities. And we're defining that as Black, Hispanic, Latino, LGBT, veterans, disabled, etc. And that's at the early career pipeline, right? And then as you go up, and I just had this discussion today with a very senior person at Citi and the team, what do we need to do differently where decisions are made around diverse talent? What about diverse slates, right? Who's doing the interviewing? So I would say, and I'd love to hear, some of the audience reaction to this. This is an ideal time, and importantly so, for our colleagues of diverse background and people of color to be thinking about presenting yourself authentically as a candidate who has the ability and desire to do well at a firm, Citi or anywhere else, right? Probably one of the best times ever for authentic and sincere reasons. And we're not the only ones trying to find the best qualified talent that brings a diverse perspective into the workplace. Probably the best I've seen at focus, and I can get into the actions as well. More to come. Christine, what do you think?
Bill, it's honestly heartening to hear all the work that you all are doing, the action that you're willing to take, and truly the commitment around this topic. I'll take a step back, Christian, in your question. I think when you're looking at how can our Black students and alumni and that community really ensure that they're able to make the social connections, build the network that they might need, I think it's first important to recognize that the systems in which we operate within are built on systems of privilege and power, right? The systems themselves are already designed in such a way that it makes it very hard for underrepresented groups, particularly the Black community, to be able to succeed and to be able to overcome those obstacles that, quite frankly, have been in place for 400 plus years. And so one of the things that I think we are talking about a lot at Handshake, and I want to give credit to my colleague, Harold Bell, who's actually at Spelman College. He's a dear friend and colleague of mine. We've been talking about this a lot over the past couple of weeks. And one of the things he says is, in order for any company and for any organization or entity to really do this external work, we have to do the internal work first. And that means we have to be introspective. We have to do the development. We have to really come to grips with how do we each contribute to systemic racism, to these systems of oppression, and what does that look like, and to understand our why. Because if we don't understand our why, we are the people who are also building the system. We are the people who may be perpetuating the systems or the things that we are doing within our organizations, whether that's Handshake, whether that's City, whether it's somewhere else. So I think that's really core and critical to the work that we're doing at Handshake, is to recognize first as individuals, what does that look like? How do we really kind of do that self-interrogation and examine that? And then we're also doing very similar things to Bill around our own representation in our organization. I'm proud to say that as a tech company, we're actually 40% diverse in terms of women, people of color, LGBTQ, which is pretty unheard of within sort of the tech space. Now, that doesn't mean we can't continue to get better, but it is definitely one of the things that I am certainly most proud of. However, we have a lot of work to do when it comes to levels of leadership. Right? We don't necessarily have that same representation when you look at the exec team, for example, and that's where we need to continue to get better. Beyond that, one of the things that we're looking at is product. And so when we look at our product and we look at the platform of Handshake, we're always thinking about how can we actually create a product, create a platform that allows for these connections to happen. So Christian, I'll give you two really concrete examples of some things that we are talking about. And I'll let you get to your next question. So one is we have something called peer messaging. And so just a year ago, we opened up the network so that students and alumni from Handshake schools are actually able to message other students and alumni from other Handshake schools. Historically, most institutions have something similar to an alumni network. I know Christian certainly does at University of Miami, and that's wonderful. You're able to connect with your Miami alums. But once you need to expand that circle a little bit, it becomes really intimidating for a student or a young alum to suddenly go on LinkedIn if you don't already have connections. Who are you supposed to connect with? It feels super awkward, right? Well, on Handshake, you're able to use reviews and Q&A and see what some other student has written as your catalyst for opening up a conversation and connecting with that student. I saw my students at Wellesley do that with students at LMU. I've seen that happen across multiple platforms, and we're really thrilled to actually see students take advantage of it so that they're actually able to open that up. And then I would actually say the second thing that I think is most interesting is about 8 months ago, Handshake opened up our platform to a Handshake open sort of network so that any student with a .edu address is actually also able to access the system, to be able to find opportunity, to be able to connect and use peer messaging. And that was something that was a huge shift to our structure and our systems. It was, for us, a way to continue to acknowledge our mission of democratizing opportunity for all. But I will be honest with you, and Christian actually knows this, it was also one of the hardest things for a lot of our career colleagues to grapple with, because it was truly a change to the system. And I think that's a really good example of how when people truly try and change something in the system, it's going to be met with some resistance because it's different and it's uncomfortable for people. And so I think, Bill, you and I, as we continue to push this work within our own organizations, I think it's important for the job seekers to recognize change will come, but it's not going to come without a lot of hard work and a lot of grit.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you both. Those are amazing questions, or sorry, responses to my question. I'll send you $10 each later. No, but seriously, we talked a little bit. What I love about what you just talked about, Christine, it's about opening access and, leveling the playing field as much as possible so that everybody has access, or as many people have access as possible. And by the way, for the alums on the call, Handshake is something that you have access to through, as an alum as well. So know that you can go onto the system, learn how to use it, and kind of see. And some of you who are younger alums may have already used it, but just so you know, that is available to you. One of the things we talked about, competition. So we know that when you open up, when things become more open, there maybe is an increase in competition. Then you layer on top of that COVID-19 in terms of people being laid off and fewer jobs being posted perhaps. I wanted to kind of switch gears in terms of, how do you stay competitive? And do you all see value in things like certification courses and MOOCs and unpaid internships, micro internships, those kinds of things? So I'd be curious to hear from you, Bill, first, what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And the short answer would be Absolutely. I mean, let's be obviously fully transparent. Is this the best time to be out there looking for that next opportunity? And I was struck by the way that, you know, a good 55% of you answered you're 10 years plus, right? So you're professionals and you're, you know, moving up that career rank. And, you know, it might even be harder for you guys, you know, to find that role. I mean, that's a discussion we can have. And so, how do you stay competitive? I mean, you have to be determined, right? I think that, you know, Christine, going back to some of the themes you opened with and how you approach a search, right? And I'm sure you've all heard the phrase of, you know, getting a job is a full-time job and then some, right? But doing some of the things that, and let me revert to the young alum just for a second, youngest right out. If they can't get an internship this summer, and I've had this conversation, Christian, go do exactly what you said, right? Go do something to build your resume. Go volunteer in an unpaid internship. Go take a course that you know is going to help you. And this applies to anybody. Build your profile, build the capability while concurrently, it's a both and, you're continuing to seek that next job. It's not an either or. But I think your point is extremely well taken, Christian. There's so much you can do to make yourself more marketable as you're going through the job search process. So I'll give you a concrete example. You know, one of the things we focus on at Citi these days and many places is, you know, this overused phrase, the future of work. And what is it going to take from a skill set point of view and a mindset point of view to be relevant? Whether you're a student who's just starting out at the U or somebody 10, 15 years in career that's trying to enhance their skill set. So let's take an obvious example, right? If it's, you know, old tools, which will change, it's Excel, right? If it's new tools, it's Python as a coding language, or at least understanding the language of analytics and computer science, right? And you can go anywhere from there. Go learn about those things while you're doing your concurrent search. And then, Christine, you had said earlier, be industry immersed, right? You know, I can't tell you how many times I say, you want to work in financial services and I'm a HR professional? Sorry, HR, great, it's transferable. But you want to work in our industry as an HR professional, as an example, you better come in understanding the language of finance. You guys can't see it. I've got CNBC still on out of the corner of my eye because it was a bad day in the markets, but you get the point. Be a student of the industry that you want to enter. So you can stay competitive in a lot of different ways, but the short answer, Christian, do those things that help build your profile, even though it might not be exactly what you're looking to do at the moment, but don't give up the focus on search. Yeah. Christine, what do you think? I mean,
I mean, 100%.
Pretty obvious, right?
I really don't. Yeah, I really don't need to say anything more. Bill covered it all. That's exactly right. I think the key point to what Bill said was it's a both and. It is really not an either or. You have to diversify essentially your portfolio right now. So whatever it is you're doing, you're going to need to do a little bit of a lot of those things. So definitely, absolutely take the time to build those skills.
So to follow up on that, you know, I think that it's easy to tell folks, you know, to get a certificate, take a course, but these things cost money, right? It's an investment, especially when you may be willing to make that investment, but now is not the time because you're dealing with, you know, unemployment and those kinds of things. At the top, off the top of your head, what are some things that are out there that maybe don't cost a lot of money or are free to individuals that help them build skills, gain knowledge, gain, you know, beyond the obvious, you know, LinkedIn and those kinds of things, although LinkedIn Learning is fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think you named a couple. You also have Udacity, you have Udemy, you have Coursera, you have edX, right? You have a lot of these free platforms now where you're able to do a lot of learning. You have Khan Academy. I mean, the reality is I have a 7-year-old son. He was using some of these himself as a way to get through the rest of first grade, right? So these things are available. They're out there. They're free. Quite frankly, you can learn a lot on YouTube. And so there are opportunities for you to be able to learn. I would also say it's really remarkable to see how communities are coming together whether that's on Instagram, whether that's on Facebook, whether that's through some other online forums. And so sometimes communities are teaching each other things. And so you might also look within your local community, are there groups, whether that's parents, or are there groups within young professionals, or are there groups within more seasoned engineers, for example, who are actually willing to also kind of barter and trade skills. I'll teach you this if you could teach me that, right? So I think it's time for us to get a little bit more creative about where it is we can gain those skills, and they don't have to just be in a course format. It could be very ad hoc. It could be a moment here, a moment there, because we're all stretched for time as well. So don't think of it in a super traditional sense, but rather, I just want to learn. So who are the people from which I might be able to learn from?
Yeah,
Excellent.
100%. The only thing I would add, and I think you nailed it, Christine, would be, do that research up front, back to the point of skills that are going to enhance whoever you are, what you're trying to get to. So you got to be very, if you will, intentional maybe around, the learnings, because there's so much out there that you could spend your time on. So be appropriately selfish to yourself, if you will. Go in there and be targeted. If I can get through that and build this understanding or capability, it's going to help me on this. So it is a thought process that goes into where would I want to spend my limited time that I have to build my skills and capabilities. So couldn't agree more.
Thank you both. I want to remind everybody who's on the call to feel free to type in your questions into the Q&A box. And Christine, I've had some folks ask if you could repeat the learning resources that you mentioned a little bit slower. I think people were trying to write it down.
Yes, no problem, no problem. So you have LinkedIn Learning, you have Udacity, you have Udemy, you have Coursera, you have edX, you have Khan Academy. Those are some of the various platforms that offer some level of free learning and free classes.
And I do have to
in addition to the other things I meant.
Thank you very much. And I do have to plug our very own continuous learning offerings at the university. They've just put out 2 MOOCs that are absolutely free to alumni. So you could check those out. And they have a lot of other options and more to come in the coming year that are available to alumni that are going to be free and also low cost and, a large variety. So definitely check those things out. So I'm going to switch focus to some of the questions that were submitted to us before the panel. So one of them is revolves around virtual interviews. So what do they look like? How do candidates manage AI software, and are they biased? It's an interesting question.
Can you repeat that one again? I want to make sure I got, that was a long one. I want to make sure I got all of it.
Sorry, I'm trying to put in 3 questions into one. What do virtual interviews look like? How do candidates manage AI software for interviews, and are they biased?
Yeah. So just a clarifying question on that, Christian, to the point, virtual interviews could be higher view, if you're referring to that, where it's asynchronous, it's one way, right? Or it could be the reality that everything going on right now, at least in our firm, I'm sure everywhere else, is a Zoom-based, video interview to find a job. So are you referring to both or the asynchronous type?
I think there were 2 questions, but I think one is one and one is the other. So yes, if you could address both.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just start quickly. I think, look, right now, nobody's showing up in person anywhere. So the new normal is virtual interviewing, right? And whether it be a first round or whether it be a super day or a final round, depending on what kind of job you're interviewing for, I think they're very effective, especially with the technology we have today. I will also say at Citi, we are currently not of the asynchronous type, and others of our competitors and other firms could be using it quite effectively. And, the firm, and no disrespect to HireVue, they're probably a leader in this space, but some firms are using we're going to pump 5 questions at you and you have to answer and you have to submit it. And at least students, I'm not sure about alum, are saying they don't really love it, but some firms are finding it very helpful and very effective in helping them narrow things down. I'll also say this, if I had an option, and I give this advice often, between I'm going to get on the phone and do a first round with you in a traditional audio call, or do you have an option and can you ask to get on a Zoom, quote, virtual video call, I would opt clearly for the latter, because I just think it's so important to get that, the nonverbals, the energy, the hand movements, the connection with somebody. And a little tip, sometimes somebody will say to you, because they think it's the expectation, hey, I'll give you a call and we'll do that interview at 3 o'clock. And I don't know, Christine, what do you think? It's not so terrible to say, hey, that's great, but would you be open, interviewer, to having it a video call? Just for the obvious, I think it gives the interviewee a bit of an edge. So, Christine, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it also gives the interviewee a chance to get a better sense of the company and the culture that they're thinking about working at, right? There is something about being able to see someone and at a very minimum sort of connect with the minimal body language that you have going on at the top here. But yeah, I think anytime you can make something a video call, if possible, if you have the internet, if you have the bandwidth, you're able to do that. I think it's always worthwhile to ask for that. So I would agree with that, Bill. I think that's absolutely right. And I think Bill covered it in terms of the virtual interview component. What I would say to the question about sort of is AI biased and sort of all of those components, I think honestly the straight answer is yes, because AI is built by people and people are biased, right? So inherently there's going to be some level of bias that's in the AI that's being built. However, there are ways to mitigate for that. And a lot of really thoughtful engineers and product teams that are working on these types of technology are thinking about that. So I personally, if I were using a tool like that, we also, similar to Bill, we don't use any asynchronous interviewing tools for our company. But if we were, I think one of the things that I would ask questions about is, what do you use as your training data? So AI is essentially functions and is built off of millions of points of data, and you have to essentially train it, right? So who's training it? Who's building it? Can I see the makeup of your team? And can I understand the kind of training data that you're putting into the system to essentially teach it, right? So are you using diverse training data? And so what does that look like? I'd probably ask more questions about that so I could have a better understanding of what exactly we potentially would use or not use. And as a candidate, I think personally that's an interesting question that I would have and that I would at least enjoy engaging in a conversation about.
Absolutely.
Thank you. That was great. You mentioned culture, so I want to switch gears because that's another question that someone asked. How do I assess a company or organization's culture in an interview, especially when you're not physically there? You don't get to see all the people walking around, and do they believe in diversity? Are they just talking about it? But then, how do I know that they have a diverse, workforce? So how do you assess that? And then how do you ask those questions? How do you ask questions like, how did you respond to COVID-19? Are you committed to diversity and inclusion? What are some examples? So if you could, either one of you or both.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in here, Christine. Sorry, Chris. This is one of my favorite.
Go for it.
No. This is one of my favorite topics, and I think you nailed it, Kristen. Look, despite how difficult it might be in the current environment to get a job, right, in this environment, the job that you want, I would urge you, to your point, please do a lot of upfront research, Christine, back to your opening themes, right, about the company that you're considering. Talk to as many people inside the firm, maybe who've worked at the firm, read some of the material, a lot of the material that's out there, annual reports. You don't have to read the whole thing, but what's the CEO saying? What are some of the actions that they're taking around commitment to diversity and inclusion, and how would you learn about that? And then I respect in an interview somebody asking about what is the culture of this place, because more than ever before, and this goes to the generational differences we have, what we know 100% right now is more and more candidates are saying, I want to work for a company whose values are aligned with things that are important to me, right?
Absolutely.
Despite how difficult it might be. And, what about that manager? What about development on a team? What about the team around me? You know, am I going to be welcomed here? Is there a sense of belonging? And I would say, Christine, again, back to your comments of they go from 1 to 4 sometimes, candidates. If you don't spend quality time on those issues, sorry, shame on you. You're going in on probably some of the most important aspects of a firm without really doing your homework. So over to you, Christine.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's great. The other pieces I would say is when you're in the interview process, if you're curious about the culture, I would highly encourage you to actually ask to speak with more people if you don't feel like you've had a sense of what that might be like. If you've only had a chance to speak with somebody on HR or your hiring manager, but you haven't had a chance to speak with other members of the team that you would be working on, or potentially some of the tangential teams that you might be required to work with and lean on, ask to speak with a few more individuals. You might also ask your company if they have employee resource groups, or ERGs for short. And you might ask to speak with some of the members of those different employee resource groups. Sometimes they have women's groups, sometimes they have Black employee groups, they might have Asian American groups, people of color groups, so on and so forth. So you want to ask to be able to be connected to those individuals so you can also have their perspective on what it's truly like to work at that organization or that company. There are usually a couple of questions that I also encourage members, participants, applicants to ask when they're in this interview process. So one is when you get a chance to actually talk to some of the different individuals on your team or in some of those employee resource groups, don't be shy about asking all of them the same question in terms of what has their experience been like, and how are decisions made at the organization. That's a particularly interesting one for me personally. I use it in my own interviews. How decisions are made actually tells you a lot of information about sort of what are the power dynamics and structures within an organization. Is it actually very hierarchical? Does it follow sort of the path of positional power? Or are there actually some individuals that carry so much influence or persuasion at the organization or within your team that that's actually how decisions are made? And so you sort of know upfront what are some of those power differentials and who are some of those influential people that you might need to either make friends with or make sure you have a good relationship with going in. It might also tell you a lot about, is this the kind of environment where I can thrive with this type of decision making and sort of communication flow, or is it not because it is fundamentally different than my own communication style or approach? The second question that I often ask people, or I tell people that they can ask, and again, one of my favorites personally, is what's one unspoken rule in your organization? What's one unspoken rule in your organization? And I guarantee you, if you ask a whole bunch of people the same question, you're going to get some really interesting answers. And it will also tell you, is that a consistent experience or is it not?
Wow, that's a good one. I'm going to share that with other folks. I think this is really important because, it's almost like, you wouldn't go, you wouldn't buy a home without going to look at a bunch of different homes, right? You wouldn't buy a car without test driving. And it's almost the same concept. You want to make sure that you're going out and getting as much information, both during the interview, before the interview, after the interview, and also utilizing tools. There are tools out there, whether it's Glassdoor, I know Handshake does reviews. You want to, make all those things part of your decision-making process. And I think in a time like this, where people may be without a job or frustrated and very and stressed out, sometimes it's easy to forget those two middle steps that you mentioned, Christine, at the beginning, and go from finding a job to just applying to the job, and you end up could potentially make a bad decision and just taking a job and then realizing this culture is not a good fit for you. So thank you both for those for saying that.
Kristen, how many times, just quickly to the point, do you hear, why'd you leave that company? And the overly generic response is, geez, it just wasn't a cultural fit, right? Well, why wasn't it a cultural fit? It's all the things you just said, right? And look, you can only get so far, right? But you can do that research and get a better sense than going in there blind, right? But I hear that way too often. I left there because, geez, it just wasn't a good cultural fit. What does that mean? And you drill down around their experience. So I think that time spent up front, to your point, critical.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
So another question that someone asked is, how does someone impress you? And I think that was specific for Bill, but I want to ask both of you because I think, you have different perspectives. And we've mentioned research and obviously knowing about the company, that's going to be
Yeah.
impressive. But beyond that, how does a candidate impress a potential employer?
Yeah. Christine, you want to start on that one? Or...
Sure. Yeah, no, happy to. I think I am impressed when a candidate has clearly done their homework and understands the interconnection of how the business works. And honestly, I don't care how junior the role is, if you can come in and express in the way that you answer the questions we're asking you, that you understand the decision or the role you have has implications for other teams or other parts of the work, that is super, super critical. Or if through the questions that you ask me, I can tell you're piecing things together, you can see how one team impacts another team, that tells me a lot about the way you think and a lot about sort of the background and the way you take in information and how you're able to synthesize it and then apply it. Because you asking that question or you responding is you applying it. And so I think that is particularly important. I will also say sometimes in interviews, even in a short 30-minute interview, I will probably tell you something new that you may not have known about the organization or about the work you do. And then I'll probably ask you a question towards the end of the conversation. I'll weave it into whatever we're talking about. And I want to see how quickly you're able to use that new information that you just got and weave it back into how you respond or how you think about whatever it is we're talking about. For me, that is impressive because the organization I work with moves about 1 million miles a minute. And you have to be able to keep up and to be in a very fast-paced environment, both in your thinking as well as in your action. And so for me, those are some of the components I look for. But essentially, strong EQ is like very big.
I would, Christine, just to build on that with a couple of points related thematically, I often talk about your interview technique and coming across in an effective way. And I say this generically, it's not that you should be providing so much depth. It's not too much. It's not too little. It's just enough. And what impresses me is somebody that understands or listening to the interviewer's question. Why do you want to work for Citi? Well, it's a big global company and I'd like to work for a big firm. Way too little. Why do you want to work for Citi? And you go on with a 5-minute thing and lay out every fact that you just picked up in the annual report. Way too much. In the middle is the sweet spot that says, look, I've done my research. Here's my experience. Here's what I know about your firm. And here's where I think I can connect that and do that in an articulate and crisp way. Now you've got my attention. And the last point I would make on that is an obvious one, but I think it's still very relevant. And it's the word authenticity. I can't tell you how many times you're in an interview scene and, experienced interviewees or not, or junior, and you just get that feeling. And I've been interviewing for a long time. This person is just playing me, right? And they just want to rattle off and it's not authentic and it doesn't come across sincere in that way. And I'll give you a quick example. I always asked about strengths and opportunity areas, not weaknesses. They'd say, oh, you mean weaknesses? No, opportunity areas. And then they say, geez, the traditional, I'm a perfectionist. And I probably roll my eyes,
Yes.
because it's such a weak answer, but you get the point. Not sincere, not authentic. Being able to talk about your gaps, but then obviously respond to what you're doing to closing those gaps, but do that in an authentic, sincere way, that resonates with me. That impresses me. Here's somebody I can work with and I can trust, and they're self-aware enough and they're confident enough to bring that forth in an interview setting.
Excellent. So can we all
Love
agree
that.
to retire as saying that perfectionist is your
Yeah.
weakness? Because it's a terrible, 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 terrible response. So if there's one thing you learn from this, please give up that response. So we're getting towards the end, and I want to make sure we have enough time for a final. I want you to reflect on a final question that I have as we finish. But before we do that, because we have a lot of folks who have been out for a while, who may experience a gap in their resume, in their experience. How do you manage that? How do you handle that? How do you spin that? I don't want to say the word spin because it sounds negative, but how do you address that authentically without having to kind of come up with a story, whether it was a layoff or you were let go or whatever the case may be? How do you handle that?
Bill, do you want to go first and I'll tag on?
Yeah, I'll take a quick shot at that. I would go back to being sincere and being transparent as a starting point, right? So it happens, right? New management comes in, I got laid off, the firm ran into a problem. As long as you can be upfront about it, I can't tell you how many times, even in a resume, it doesn't tell you, and I have to ask, well, are you still there? Or no, I left 4 months ago when I was impacted by a restructuring. Well, I'd rather know that up front and know that sincerely, and because it's going to come up, I'm going to ask. So I don't think you need to be reluctant, and sometimes your answer isn't going to be 100%, connective to great, candidate flow, but at least it's going to be transparent. And there are so many things that are going on in job life and career life right now that would impact being impacted. And I think there's much more receptivity to that as long as you're upfront and you're transparent and say, look, I got a gap here. And during that gap, back to your previous point, Kristen, what I did is I went and really honed my skills in, computer science, whatever it might be, so that I'm better prepared to do this. But be authentic. Sorry, Christine?
Yes, no, I completely agree. I think it's about owning your story, right? This is your chance to sort of tell your narrative about what happened and what it is you did with that time. So Bill's totally spot on. I think the other piece to keep in mind is, remember those 4 buckets. The third one was networking. This is why networking is so important. This is why you need to build and have those relationships, because having somebody be able to vouch for you or having somebody be able to connect you to an opportunity, someone who understands that story from a very humanistic and sort of authentic place, again, is going to make it a little bit easier for you to potentially get your foot in the door, and for someone to not see that as a liability, but rather to see it as an asset. So I think it goes hand in hand, kind of putting all those pieces together.
Yeah, can I just build on that? Because you bring up, we didn't spend a lot of time on networking, but if it's somebody from the U, I don't care how long they've been out or how soon they've been out, and they have found a way to connect to me, and they ask me, and I tell them how to look up jobs, and I say to them sincerely, if you find something that you applied for, send it to me as well with your cover letter, and I will make sure I will get it to the recruiter, at least to get it on the top of the pile. The importance of a connection, and you find people that are willing to go a half a step for you, because now your resume is on top of the pile. If I have any credibility with that recruiter, they'll at least take a look. So the advantage of leveraging that network, and don't be shy to say, would you mind connecting me with the recruiter for that job? I'll offer it anyway, but sometimes you never ask. It's that extra little push that's going to give you the edge that might get you that first round, and who knows from there.
Thank you. And I keep saying, now's not the time to be shy. Now's not the time to take risks. And really, it's all about being unapologetic about what you're looking for. And everyone in your life should know you're looking for something. And it's okay to ask. People genuinely do want to help. And they may not be in a position to help, but they may know many people or other people who can help.
Absolutely.
Before we segue into
I would also say really quick, Christian, make it easy for people to help, right? So you can't just tell people I'm looking for a job, because then like your cousins, your friends, friends, they don't know what to do with that information. Okay, cool. So there's jobs. Which one does Christian want, right? Like make it easy. Make sure it's simple for them to repeat back. Oh, Christian wants a job in this. or Christian's really looking to pivot to this area. Like, make it easy for them to help you.
It's a great point. Thank you. Before we end with our final thoughts, I want to make sure that the alums, that you all know that we have a website that is available to you that has a lot of resources for alums at all stages of their careers, including blogs and videos, but also just great resources, as well as connections to other alumni who can mentor you, or you can mentor them, just get more information. And the website is very simple. It's alumnicareer.miami.edu. Once again, it's alumnicareer.miami.edu, so definitely check that out. So I want to segue into kind of the final thoughts, which will kind of set us up for one of the next sessions that we're going to be having in the series, and that's about positivity. What are your thoughts or recommendations for folks who maybe are feeling a little bit down and really want, how do you stay positive in this kind of situation if you've been laid off or you can't find that job, it's kind of been dragging on?
Mm-hmm. Should I take this one first this time?
Please.
Well, okay. I think one of the first things to keep in mind is build yourself some lifelines. So I have a colleague that uses this term lifelines, and what he essentially means by that is you need people in your life that are going to be real with you and that are going to support you unconditionally. That could be family members, but it could also be friends. It could be former colleagues. It could be current colleagues. Make sure you have people in your life that you can go to, that you can talk to, that you can share your experience and to truly get their perspective so that they can keep you in check about your attitude and how you are looking at things and sort of maintaining this positive mindset. I think one really important thing to keep in mind is job searching in some ways is really similar to dating. Nobody wants to date someone who's desperate, right? If you're like desperate and you're just sad all the time, like nobody wants to be around you. And it's kind of the same thing with the job search. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind and make sure you have your lifelines that you can go to and vent to so that they can help get you back on track when you need it.
Yeah, 100%. I'm not sure there's much to add there. It's a matter of determination. By the way, I'm going to do a quick commercial there since you're giving out websites for all the Miami alum. If it's city and financial services, simply jobs, jobs.city.com. So not the best time in the world given what we're going through, but we haven't been doing layoffs and there are still thousands of jobs out there and you can search on it. So if you find something, give me a shout and certainly happy to help. Yeah, I mean, there's so many times you see people that are in very tough circumstances, Christine, to your point, yet they keep that positive approach. And that positivity comes through in interviews. It really does, right? As long as it's authentic. And I don't think there's any magical formula here because we're all different personalities and styles and circumstances and experiences. But if you can find it, as we say, it only takes one great connection and off you go, right? And now you're into it and your whole outlook is changing. So it's not an easy thing, let's be honest, right? If you're in a situation and you're 6 months in and you're not getting a bite, how do you get up every morning and send those 25 plus, right? But I think you got to be determined, you got to stay the course. And I think as we all know, good people find good opportunities. It just takes the perseverance.
Thank you so much. And wow, look at that. We're finishing right on time. I can't thank you enough, both Bill and Christine, for joining us today and sharing your wisdom and insights. I love that we were able to cover a good, a range of topics. And so I really appreciate it. I know our alumni appreciate your wisdom. So thank you so much. Christine, I guess I owe you a dinner once, and Bill too. So, but thank you so much. Thank you all for joining us. As I mentioned, this is just the first in a 4-part series. So we would love to invite you to participate in one more or all of them. As I mentioned, go to that alumni website to get more information. So thank you so much. Go Canes.
Go Canes.
Canes, City Canes.
There you go.